Hello there, welcome to the Sunday Show. I'm Martin Geissler. A big programme for you this morning. The voters in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse delivered a pretty clear message on Thursday. But what are we to make of it? Anas Sarwar's Labour Party won the seat, of course, but can they really take that as an endorsement of their politics? He'll join me in the studio in just a minute. I'm going to ask him. And the First Minister, John Swinney, is on the show too. Boy, does he have a lot to think about. The SNP got almost 50% of the vote in the same constituency last time round. So how on earth did they lose it here? Two big interviews coming your way in the next half hour. After that, on the radio, Lucy takes over. Good morning to you, Lucy.
Morning, Martin. We'll keep the conversation going around that by-election result, and we'll also look ahead to a big week in politics next week with Chancellor's spending review. We'll discuss what's thought to be the growing problem of criminal gangs using children to do their work for them, and motorcycle thefts are up across the country. Bikers are fed up. We'll be speaking to them about what they plan to do about it.
Excellent. Lucy with you on the radio from 10:30. Let's get on with the show. Yeah, two big interviews coming up, loads to discuss. You can get involved in the conversation as well. Of course, if you want to tell us what you think, just get onto social media and use the hashtag BBC Sunday Show. So, quite the night on Thursday. The party of government in Scotland swept aside at the ballot box by the party of government at Westminster. But before anyone gets too carried away with all of that, there is another massive story here in the shape of the emergence of Reform UK, the insurgent party of the right. Labour's Davy Russell, the new MSP for the constituency, said in his victory speech that Scotland had rejected Nigel Farage and his poisonous politics. But did they? Reform hoovered up more than a quarter of the vote on Thursday. So what does all of this tell us as we look towards an election in Scotland next May? Well, Anas Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, joins me in the studio this morning to discuss. Good morning.
Good morning, Martin.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
First of all. You won, but with a smaller share of the vote than you got, or a smaller number of votes than you got last time in this constituency, in an election where you came third. What lessons have you learned from this by-election?
I think fundamentally three things came out of the by-election. The first is the people across Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse are tired of this SNP government that has failed them every single day, that has broken our NHS, that's seen a decline in our schools, it has wasted billions of pounds, and they reject them. They think they're out of steam, they think they're out of ideas, and they want them out of office. I think that's clear, and it's also clear that only Scottish Labour can do that. The second lesson we learned is, for all the noise of reform and all the noise of Nigel Farage, the people did reject Reform UK and Nigel Farage. And the third lesson...
A quarter of the people, more than a quarter of the people endorsed them.
I'll say a bit more about that in a moment if you want to ask me about that, Martin, no issue at all. And the third thing is, I've got to reflect not just on the result, but also the conversations I had on the doorstep. And on those conversations, people do want a UK Labour government to go much quicker in terms of them feeling a demonstrable difference in their lives. I think that was loud and clear too.
Yeah, more and faster was the slogan you were coming out with on Friday. Slogans are all very well, but what specific policies were they criticising?
Well, obviously there's a frustration around the winter fuel payment, and we have said that we will reinstate the winter fuel payment here in Scotland, but they also want to feel a more tangible difference. And I think this is where we have to get the balance right. Where does the role of a UK Labour government and how it affects people's day-to-day lives fit compared to where a Scottish government and people's day-to-day lives? So people do want to see energy bills come down. They've started to come down. We want to see them come down faster than they have, though. People want to see the cost of living improve. The cost of mortgages has come down significantly since a Labour government's come in with economic stability. That's why you've seen 4 interest rates cuts, but they still want to see that go further and faster too. But if you look at the things that touch people's lives every single day, the National Health Service, their schools, their transport system, their local services, housing, all of that is the responsibility of an SNP government,
sure,
and they have abjectly failed in every single one of those
You're in the
areas.
Papers this morning saying that we need a clearer demonstration from the UK Labour government that we're improving people's lives in Scotland. I make no bones about that. Sir Keir Starmer, you say, accepts this has to happen. Have you spoken to him since Thursday?
Yeah, I have. I spoke to him on Friday morning.
So what message did you take from the doorsteps of Hamilton to Downing Street? What did you tell him to do?
Well, exactly that is what can we do that demonstrates a tangible difference in a much more clearer way to people here in Scotland.
And what's the answer?
Now, he himself accepts that it's been a challenging first year and they have to move quicker. He said that after the local elections. He believes it now. And in terms of what it means for people in Scotland, the tangible difference there is around the cost of living and what's happening, for example, around economic stability, growth, etc., energy bills and people's mortgages.
Doing what?
Whereas, well, greater investment, for example, in the clean energy of the future, trying to get greater partnerships and getting the fruits of those partnerships. We had 3 really significant trade deals, for example, just in the last month. But obviously, we're still to see the fruits of those trade deals, which will make a meaningful difference to people that do trade with the European Union, make a meaningful difference to people and companies that do trade with the US and with India. And then how does that flow down to benefit people's individual lives in terms of their jobs, in terms of their wages, and in terms of their other individual circumstances?
I mean, so you've come into power, and in the first year, your marquee policies have been targeting poor children, pensioners, the elderly. So I mean, and your granny with the waspy women, right? So what do you do about all of that? Which ones of those do you reverse? The two-child benefit cap?
But again, you're going down the wrong route, Martin. You're going down the same route that the commentators went down before the by-election.
Well, am I wrong?
Look what happened in the by-election.
Am I wrong?
The SNP got beat, Reform got beat, and the Scottish Labour Party won because people here want to see a change in their lives from a Scottish government. That's what the choice is next year.
But investment in long-term investment in renewable energy.
The choice next year is not to remove a UK Labour government. It's not to change who the Prime Minister is. The choice next year is a third decade of the SNP with John Swinney as First Minister, or a new direction for Scotland with me as First Minister to improve our NHS, to improve our schools, to improve our transport system,
a year ago,
to improve our housing, all of which are the responsibility of the SNP, none of which the SNP spoke about in the campaign.
Let me ask you about your responsibilities. A year ago now, you were in here talking to me in the run-up to a general election. All you would talk about was GB Energy. Massive impact, massive impact. The flagship policy, vote for us, we will deliver GB Energy. You said in your manifesto that it would create 69,000 renewable jobs. Very specific number. How many jobs has it created now, a year on?
Well, Martin, I think you have to live in the real world rather than any fantasy world.
It was in your manifesto.
No, 1 second. To set up the legislation, set up a company, make the appointments in terms of who runs that company, to then start making the investments and then see the fruits of those investments. Any sensible person in the country will know that that will take longer than 10 months if you are to get to that final outcome.
So these people in Hamilton who are saying, my life feels hard,
it is a crazy suggestion for you to make that somehow a Labour government comes in, after 10 months, we clear up all the mess left by the Tories after 14 years, and we build a utopia across our country. People didn't buy it in the run-up to the by-election, and that's why the SNP and Reform got beat.
Why should they buy what you're telling them this morning? Because I've just asked you what they're saying to you on the doorstep. And they are saying, to paraphrase you, my life is hard, it feels hard, I don't have enough money. And I'm asking you what you're going to do about it. And you're saying, we're going to invest in renewable energy. You're telling me now it's crazy to think that happens
I'll give you one example, Martin.
So what policies are you going to change now to put money in people's pockets now?
Well, I'll tell you, Martin. One is you have a UK Labour government that is moving quickly to try and get economic stability. That's why you've seen interest rates cuts. That's why you've seen mortgages fall by over £1,000 on average. You're starting to see energy bills come down. But I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop the privatisation of our NHS. What I mean by that is people having to go private for their procedures rather than getting them on the NHS. John Swinney kept talking about the winter fuel payment. What he ignored was he is forcing pensioners across the country to pay £16,000 to get their hip replacements. 40% of the hip and knee replacements that happen in our country right now, on the SNP's watch, people are paying for privately. And what they're sick of is a focus simply on one government that's been in for 10 months, that doesn't have power and control of these issues that affect people's everyday lives, and the commentariat wanting to ignore a party that's been in power for 18 years, and the best that John Swinney had to offer after 18 years was vote SNP to stop Farage. A dishonest, shameful campaign, lack of ambition, running down the clock, and having no idea about what's affecting the day-to-day lives of people
from the NHS, where you started this
which is a disgrace.
Let me ask you about that. Some of the problems that the NHS are facing, considerable number of the problems the NHS are facing, are down to an immigration policy that stops them getting the staff they need.
It's down to mismanagement from the SNP. It's down to billions of pounds of wasted money. It's down to incompetence after 18 years.
Just let me finish a question.
But what I'm saying, Martin, is you're obsessed with a UK Labour government when the NHS is completely in the control of the SNP, and you're falling for the exact same narrative that commentators had going into the by-election.
Can I finish my point?
Commentators embarrassed, posters embarrassed, pundits embarrassed, and frankly, your questions are embarrassing too, Martin.
Well, I think you should be slightly embarrassed that you're not listening to my questions.
Go for it.
Right. Part of the problem with the NHS, as I was saying, is that they can't get a lot of the staff they need because of an immigration policy. 6 months ago, you said you were talking to the Home Office about a bespoke visa system to allow Scotland to have the handle on immigration that it needs. Where are you with that?
Well, what we said was we would build an immigration system that worked for every part of the country, and we would have a single UK Home Office, we would have a single UK border agency, but we needed to build an immigration system that worked for every part of the country and also link skills, but also link pay and conditions. And what you can have is really poor, chronically low pay in social care, and then simply try and use immigration as a fix for that.
Are we going to get our own immigration system?
No, but why would we have our own immigration system? We would have an immigration system that's tailored for the needs of individual parts of the country. That's what we said.
I thought you said at the start of this year you'd had talks with the UK government about a bespoke Scottish visa system.
No, again, Martin, you are misleading in your characterisation. We have always said a single UK border agency, a single UK Home Office, but an immigration system that reflects the needs of different parts of the country. And what I was speaking of was the example when Jack McConnell was First Minister and you had a Labour government in Scotland and a Labour government across the UK that was able to develop a scheme that respected a single border agency, that respected a single Home Office, but was able to find solutions that worked for different parts of the country, including here in Scotland. Okay, that's what we're trying to build in terms of an immigration system. But again, you want to talk about a UK Labour government and let the SNP off scot-free.
No, I'm just about to speak to the First Minister about his party. I wouldn't mind talking to you about yours.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about what we're going to do here in Scotland. Talk about how we're the only party that can remove the SNP from office. Talk about how we're going to fix the NHS. Talk about how we're going to fix our schools. Talk about how we're going to stop the wasting of billions of pounds of money and respect taxpayers' money. All of those issues, the responsibility of the Scottish Government and a Scottish Labour Government will fix all those issues and end 18 years of destruction.
Well, you're going to have to wait a year.
SNP government.
You're going to have to wait a year at least. In the meantime...
Well, no, I'm having those conversations with the people of Scotland right now directly, and that's why we won that by-election.
Are you asking the Prime Minister to scrap the two-child benefit cap? Would that be a good idea? Well, to put more money into people's pockets?
Our position on the two-child benefit cap has not changed. I want to see it removed as fast as possible, but the economic conditions have to allow, and that's a position that I've seen Cabinet Ministers recognise across all of the UK.
Can you tell me one thing that you're telling Keir Starmer to do now that you've picked up from Hamilton that would make an immediate difference to people's lives? One thing.
Well, we have to continue with economic stability. We have to get growth up. That is going to improve jobs and conditions for people.
It's quite abstract, all that, isn't it?
But it's not abstract. Bringing people's interest rates down so their mortgages are reduced isn't abstract, Martin. Maybe perhaps you don't have a mortgage. People do have mortgages across the country, and seeing their mortgages come down by over £1,000 since Labour came to government is
by boosting economic growth.
Well, that's
you told us you were going to do that a year ago, and you haven't.
Well, it's already happened. There have been 4 interest rates cuts because of economic stability, and those 4 interest rates cuts have meant that the average mortgage is down by over £1,000. Okay. We've now started to see energy bills come down, but that has to come down much quicker because people feel a real pressure in the cost of living crisis. Right. But all the issues that you want to simply ignore in your conversation with me that affect people's day-to-day lives are the responsibility of the Scottish Government, and that's why the people that's why the people of Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse utterly rejected the SNP and Reform and sent a message to John Swinney that he ran a dishonest and disgraceful campaign that attempted to push people into the arms of Reform rather than confront the issues that he has caused in people's communities across the country. And that's why ultimately people want them removed from office. Okay, listen, and the message is clear. If you want to remove the SNP, you have to vote Scottish Labour.
Let's find out what the First Minister has to say about that. We're speaking to him in about half a minute. Anas Sarwar, meantime,
my pleasure.
Thank you very much for your time this Sunday morning. Now then, if you want to have your say, if you want to be the person who's asking the politicians the questions, why not join the audience on debate night? Here's Stephen Jarden to tell you how.
Thank you, Martin. Debate night is the only show in Scotland giving you the chance to put your questions to the people in power. This week, we'll be in Scotland's capital. So if you want to come along and have your say on the big issues of the day in Edinburgh, just go to the website bbc.co.uk/debate night and join us Wednesday at 9 o'clock on the BBC Scotland channel.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, the First Minister, John Swinney, said repeatedly that Labour wouldn't be at the races in the by-election on Thursday. It was a two-way fight, he said, between his party, the SNP, and Reform. How on earth did he get that so wrong? And what does he do now with an election less than a year away? Let's ask him. The First Minister joins me now from his home in Perthshire. Good morning, Mr Swinney.
Morning, Martin.
Right, I see we have a delay on this line. We'll make the best of it. Listen, answer me this question first of all. What does Thursday's result tell you about the state of the SNP?
Obviously, I'm disappointed that we didn't win the by-election on Thursday. We fought a very energetic campaign with an excellent candidate in Katie Loudon. We set out the reasons and the rationale for voting SNP, but I recognise that wasn't enough to win the constituency. And I've got to build on that, recognising that I came into office a year ago, inheriting some significant difficulties for the SNP, and we're in a process of recovery. We've not recovered, we're recovering, and we've got to get stronger as a consequence.
Well, you spent quite a lot of time in the constituency. You were eyeballing voters in real life, as they say. What were they telling you about your party and what you're doing wrong?
People were telling us that they're concerned about the cost of living issues. Folk are having to work hard for less and they're struggling. And they're also raising with me issues about the performance of the public services, particularly around the National Health Service. And those are the two issues that I recognised amongst the anger of people within Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse that need to be fundamentally addressed. We need to do everything we can to help people who are struggling with the cost of living. Some of that I can take forward within the Scottish Government, and I will do everything I can. And there's other improvements in performance in the National Health Service, particularly, that we need to deliver on, and that's exactly what I'm focused on in the course of my work as First Minister and throughout this parliamentary term.
Like what? What are you going to do in the NHS? What specific plans do you have to make immediate and meaningful change within the health service?
The focus that I've got is on two things particularly: reducing waiting times and waiting lists and improving access to local GP and community services. So those are the two things that I recognise have to be prioritised. So we've got to get more procedures undertaken so that waiting lists come down and that people can get treatment faster. Many people get treatment fast within our National Health Service system, but not enough people, and we need to tackle that issue and make the improvements. And then in terms of GP access, I just set out a few weeks ago in the programme for government measures that won't have taken effect yet, but which strengthen the access to local pharmacy services, GP services, to make sure people can get interventions earlier and quicker than they previously anticipated. And I've got to recognise the importance of delivering on those improvements to improve the quality of life of individuals in our communities.
You've been in power for 18 years. Are people not entitled to think that if you had the answers, as Labour keeps suggesting, you'd have fixed it by now?
There's been very strong performance in the National Health Service over a number of years, and there's been a lot of performance in the Scottish Government in tackling the cost of living challenges. But there's always this. Of course there has been. Well, if you look at the steps that we've taken over the years, for example, we've provided free prescriptions to reduce costs for people.
Sure, but it's widely considered now to be in a complete mess, is it not?
What I would say, I was just going to set out to you some of the cost of living measures that we've taken. So, for example, in early learning and childcare, families have saved thousands of pounds a year because of the provision that we have for early learning and childcare. We've introduced concessionary travel for younger people to enhance their social mobility and to enable young people to participate more effectively in the labour market. Now, these are all steps we've taken. Now, I recognise we've got to build on those. In relation to the NHS, we're still recovering from the COVID pandemic that has created such difficulty in the NHS. But with focused work on reducing waiting times, I'm determined to make that journey successful for people.
You painted this by-election very specifically and repeatedly as a two-horse race. Labour are not at the races, it's between the SNP and Reform, you said. Were you being given bad data?
No, what I said transpired. The Labour vote collapsed. A year ago, the Labour Party commanded 50% of the vote in this area, and on Thursday they got just over 30%. I said that Reform was surging.
Mr Swinney, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in. You said it was a two-horse race, and the party you said wasn't at the races won.
But my point, Martin, which I've just made, is that Labour support was collapsing compared to last year, and Reform support was surging. But now, that said to me that we had to do all that we could to stop Farage and Reform succeeding. And I said to people the best way to do that was to vote SNP to stop Farage, because the Labour vote was collapsing on its performance last year, and it did.
But OK, so you're suggesting that your data was right in that the Labour vote was falling. It fell by about 2 or 3%. Your vote crumbled further. Was nobody telling you that was about to happen?
The point I'm making, Martin, is that compared to last year, when we had a vote, a general election vote in that constituency, the Labour vote was collapsing. People were saying to us on the doors, I'm never voting Labour again because they've cut the winter fuel payment from pensioners, and they promised me to reduce my energy bills, and my energy bills have in fact gone up. So that's what people were telling us on the doorstep, and they were giving us reasons why they weren't supporting Labour. We could also see that Farage support was rising dramatically, and that's happening across the United Kingdom. It's nothing unique to Hamilton, it's happening everywhere.
Right.
And I positioned the SNP to be strong enough to stop Farage, and that's what we were determined to do.
Right. I mean, there is another theory here, isn't there? And Anas Sarwar has just posited it a minute ago on this programme. He said you ran a dishonest and disgraceful campaign, and this was a cynical move to push reform right into the middle of the spotlight to eat into their vote.
Long before the by-election took place, I was gathering together Scottish society to stand up to far-right thinking and influence in our society. And Anas Sarwar was a willing participant and partner in that endeavour. That was months ago. And then we found ourselves in a by-election in the aftermath of the UK local authority election, the English local authority elections, where Farage surged to a leading position and won a by-election from Labour south of the border. So the dynamics of our politics change in front of us. I've been standing up to Farage for months. I've been warning about the dangers of Farage for months. And they crystallised in the rise of Farage during the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election.
How do you think that has happened? How do you think they win more than a quarter of the vote, Mr Swinney? What do you make of the people who are voting for reform? Are they either gullible people who are being seduced by a wrong-thinking message, or are they racists, as you describe the party itself?
I think they're neither. I think they're people who are angry at the cost of living and the difficulties that they're facing. That's what motivates the reform vote. Now, the problem is that Farage represents something, very much additional to that, which is all the other things that you talked about in your comment to me a second ago. But the public who were voting for Farage were voting for him because they're angry at the cost of living challenges. And ironically, the standards of living of people in this country have declined. People have got poorer because of one central thing, Brexit. And the author of that is Farage. And I'm standing up to Farage, and I'm going to make no apology for it.
Right. There is a lot of anger as well within the Yes movement, the pro-independence movement, is there not? A real anger that you're not doing enough to promote the cause of independence, to further the cause of independence. Do you hear that?
Yeah, of course I hear that, Martin. I listen very carefully to all that is said in political debate in Scotland, particularly debate amongst those who share my objective of winning Scottish independence. When I became First Minister a year ago, we were in a very difficult situation, as demonstrated by the poor election result that we got last summer. And I had to rebuild our position so that we could get a hearing from the public within Scotland. And I've been doing that by trying to improve the performance of the Scottish Government on delivering on the priorities of the people. I've focused our agenda directly on the concerns of the public in Scotland. Now, what I've got to do now, and I acknowledge this, and it's always been part of my plan, is to set out where the hope comes from in our politics. And the hope comes in our politics from Scottish independence, because all of the challenges we face in society today, whether it's about Brexit or about an immigration policy from the UK government that's going to be disastrous for the Scottish economy, or the spike in energy prices, are all a product of Westminster decision-making. And what I've got to do is I've got to relate all those issues to the concerns of people in Scotland and set out that the answer to that is Scottish independence. And that's the agenda that I set out to my party I would take forward in the run-up to the 2026 election.
So what do you put in your manifesto for the 2026 election? That's a really difficult question that you've got to wrestle with, isn't it? Do you say we will deliver a referendum on independence in the first term of this Parliament, in the term of the next Parliament? Because you know you can't offer that. And as a supplementary, let me ask you what you reckon would entitle you to call for that. Because this should be quite an easy question for you to answer. Is it just an election win? You stay on as First Minister. Is it a pro-independence majority, an SNP majority? Is it a majority of the popular vote? What would give you that mandate to go knocking on the door again and saying, come on, we've got to do this?
I think the key element, you asked what should be in our manifesto. What should be in our manifesto is the arguments why Scotland should be an independent country and how we can to build the future of our country based on the opportunities of independence. Fundamentally, Scotland will only become independent when the people of Scotland want that to be the case. And we saw in the course of the last few weeks strengthening of the opinion poll position in favour of Scottish independence.
But that's not working for your party. 54% in the last poll in favour of independence, 30%, less than 30% in Hamilton in favour of you.
Well, that's exactly the point I was coming on to, Martin. My challenge is to make sure that we can turn that aspiration in the public for Scottish independence into a real political action to make sure it happens. And that comes about by the SNP performing much better, of getting into a commanding position in Scottish politics and making sure that we can deliver on the expectations and aspirations of the people of Scotland. And that's what I'm focused on, about making the argument, because if we make the argument and build support for Scottish independence, I think it is absolutely impossible to stand in the way of the democratic will of the people of Scotland if they want Scotland to be independent. And that will be at the heart of the thinking that I bring to the SNP manifesto in 2026.
Right, so you're not changing your position really on that. That's what you've been saying consistently since you came into office. Joanna Cherry has said just hitting the independence button won't help the SNP. People aren't daft, and they have had enough of false promises. The SNP needs a major rethink. What a shame so many people with the necessary ideas have been alienated from a stagnant party. Crikey, that is quite the broadside from a high-profile colleague of yours in Westminster, isn't it?
Well, Joanna Cherry's not...
No, former colleague of yours at Westminster, so high-profile SNP figure.
But the point I would make, Martin, is that what I said when I became SNP leader, and I believe I've fulfilled this, is that I would deliver inclusive leadership in the Scottish National Party. I would bring people together, and I have brought people together in the SNP in a cohesive way to make sure that we focus on the priorities of the public and we lift hopes and aspirations about how we can live in a better Scotland that tackles poverty, that delivers economic opportunity, that succeeds in the journey to net zero, and is a country that can be proud of the public services that we have, that we are a fairer and a more equal country. Now, I've brought people together in the SNP to focus on that task, and I think we've made progress. We improved our performance on Thursday compared to the election last year. It's not enough. There's no way it's enough. It's got to get stronger, and it's got to get more profound within Scotland. But the SNP, by being brought together as a unified political party, has got much better prospects of achieving those objectives than it would if the SNP was focusing on anything other than the priorities of the people of Scotland.
After results like Thursday's, though, rifts do begin to emerge again. We've heard from Joanna Cherry, Alex Neil and Jim Sillars have both said you should go, you're not the right man for the job. Are you still the man to lead the party?
Yes, 12 months ago, the party turned to me. I was not seeking high office. I'd had high office for a long time in my life. And the party turned to me at a moment of real jeopardy and asked me to use all of my skills and experience, trust and the loyalty that I command within the party to bring people together and focus us on the future. Now, over the course of the last few months, we've seen real progress being made by the SNP in terms of our policy agenda. We've delivered a budget that's going to lift the two-child cap, which should have been lifted by a Labour government. We're restoring payments, winter fuel payments.
We're almost out of time. Let me just ask you very quickly, Mr. Swinney, I'm sorry. Are you going to have a reshuffle as a matter of urgency? Very quickly.
Well, Obviously, I've got a Cabinet Minister coming back from maternity leave, Mary McCallan, so I have to look at the team. I'll be doing that in due course. But the key point I want to leave you with, Martin, is that
very briefly,
in the last few months, the SNP's electoral performance in 6 local authority by-elections have been won by the SNP. We didn't win on Thursday, but we'll win again.
All right. John Swinney, First Minister, thank you very much indeed for being with us. That is all we have time for on the Sunday show. I'll be back here, same time, same place next week. Join me then if you can. If you're with me on the radio, though, don't go away, because here is Lucy and our guests.